Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. Great.
Great. Wow.
Enjoying some snow.
Yeah, tons of it. How about you?
We got like 4 inches unexpectedly this morning.
Well, so did we. It was beautiful. So, welcome everybody. We are live and recording. This is our season 3 premiere of Chebacco Chats. I am your host today. I'm Jenna Jandreau, the Communications and Engagement Manager at MDI Historical Society. And I'm joined today by Raney Bench, who is the Executive Director at the Historical Society. And we're kicking off our season 3 with a chat about the new Chebacco that'll be in members' mailboxes in May. And Raney, I'd like to start off by saying thank you for being here and tell us a little bit about Chebacco.
So the Historical Society since 1999 has been producing an annual publication. It was not initially called Chebacco, it was just the History Journal. And it was a way of sharing information and stories and history about the island, poetry, images, all sorts of different ways of communicating the really vast and varied history of the island to help advance the mission of the Mount Desert Island Historical Society. We don't have a very big public space, and especially in 1990s, they had the small Soamesville campus. So there wasn't a lot of ways for the Historical Society to go about sharing new scholarship and new information about island history with as wide of audience as possible. And so the journal was created as a way of being able to increase communication with our membership and to be able to share island history.
Great. So what we're looking at here is Journey of a Journal. Can you tell me a little bit about how it started out as the History Journal and where we landed with Chebacco? What is a Chebacco exactly?
So you can actually see, even though it was called the History Journal early on, to the upper far left-hand corner of the slide, it still had the Chebacco boat as the logo. And so this was the design and style of the boat that brought the first European, or actually white, non-native settlers to the island. And so it was deemed appropriate as they landed in Soamesville, and that's where the home base of the Historical Society was initially, to be able to use the boat as an icon, is sort of also conveying or carrying history forward to communities. So those early journals were, like I said, maybe 4 or 5 articles, some poetry and imagery. And then when or who was decided to change the name formally from the History Journal to Chebacco is not a piece of the history of the organization that I'm familiar with, but obviously they maintained the logo and then really formalized the name of the journal to reflect that, the boat. And so you see that as a prevalent design feature in the middle section of the journal's history.
Great. I do want to add that if anybody has questions, they can use the Q&A feature or the chat feature, and I will go and check those periodically so that we can insert those questions and Raney can address them. You can also add a comment on Facebook Live because we're monitoring that as well. So tell me about some of your favorite past themes and a little bit about how that informs what themes are chosen every year.
Yeah, so initially there weren't specific themes that were selected for Chebacco. They were articles of interest, or a lot of times board members or people professionally affiliated with the society were contributing articles that they had been either researching or writing about things that interested them personally. And then eventually a sort of uniting theme started to be developed for Chebacco. So we have issues focused on environmental history, Native history, women's history, outliers and bootleggers. So looking at sort of the maybe more rebellious histories of people on the island. And those uniting themes really allowed for a broader call to authors so that we could encourage lots of different citizen historians who are on the island doing family histories or personal interest histories or things that they're really passionate or curious about, to have a format to share that information more broadly with the audiences of the Historical Society. And so those uniting themes allow us to sort of create a call for authors that we put out not only to island residents, but also professional historians. Mount Desert Island has this really vast network of connections that extend far beyond our island community or even this region in Down East Maine. And so we have found that there are authors in Pennsylvania and New York and Boston and even further afield who are writing subject matters that are somehow connected with Mount Desert Island. And so by creating these themes and a broad call to authors, we are able to meet those people and engage with them and bring new ideas and new studies forward through Chebacco in that way. And we develop the themes moving forward at least 2 years in advance. So this is a pretty far thinking process. I'm already well into the development of 2023. We have all the authors identified. The theme is maritime history. They're already working away on their articles, and we're in the process of developing the call for authors for the 2024 edition of Chebacco, and we already have 3 authors on board for that. So it's constantly this pushing out in advance of what kinds of topics we might want to cover. Sometimes those are timely based on anniversaries that are coming up, or like the 2020, we did the commemoration of statehood for the bicentennial. Other times they just seem to be topics that are things that we haven't explored in a little while, or things that we want to explore, and those will be developed into the future. So it's a 2-year cycle that we go through for each one of these editions by putting out the call for authors, and then going through, we usually solicit about 16 authors, and we end up with anywhere from 12 to 14 articles when each edition is completed.
And each of those articles has images as applicable for them. And there's a kind of a hunt to track down those images if they don't happen to be in the Society's collection. And then we have, for the past few years, had a great artist in residence. And so we are able to incorporate those photographs into Chebacco as well. So this means the one that's coming out in May, you've been working on already for almost 2 years.
Correct, yes. So I took over as executive director from Tim Garrity in January of 2020. And one of the very first things that we did was start pulling together the call for authors for 2022. And then when Tim retired in September or the fall of 2020, we already had all the authors in place. And then it was my process of working with all of them to get the articles turned in. It goes through 3 different cycles of editing, the journal does. So we have a rather informal editing process where we have volunteer editors step forward and review the articles, make sure they're matching the themes, work with the authors on the length of the publication and any sort of clarifications or things that might be needed. And so that process usually results in 1 or 2 more drafts before those come to a copy editor, who then goes through and, or proof editor, who goes through and actually goes like dots all the I's, crosses all the T's, makes sure all the italices are in the right places. And then it goes to a designer who does the design work. We are now in the current phase for 2022 reviewing the design proof. So no more content changes are made at this point. It's really just making sure that the translation from every individual Word document to a publication format is successful, and we find all the little inconsistencies that we can. And then that goes to a print production, which then goes through 1 more round of editing. Again, not for content at that point, but just for the way the journal looks and to make sure that there's nothing really obvious or any mistakes that need to be corrected before the final print is produced. And image production is always a challenge. We are always looking for images to incorporate into the journals. Finding really high resolution images can be difficult. There's so much availability on the web now, but the quality of the digital scan is not always the same as what you need for a print production. And so it seems like there's this kind of catch up that takes place when we get to the final. The writing is like the easy part, and then getting the images filled in afterwards takes a little more time.
So are we ready to reveal the new Chebacco? I just have to hit the next button. Here we go. I accidentally revealed it for a second earlier. I don't know if anyone saw it. There it is.
There it
This is our
is.
sneak peek. And as I said earlier, we've been saying it's coming to members' mailboxes in May. So before we dive in a little bit too deeply on what this Chebacco is about, could you tell us how folks can get this Chebacco?
Yes, so Chebacco is a benefit of membership. So if you're a member of the Historical Society at any level, this is the main benefit that you receive for that. And so because it's produced annually and it goes through the editing process over the winter months, in the spring, it is printed and then sent in the mail to all members of the Society. We also have additional copies available for purchase. So if people join and they want back editions, we've got those available. And after a 2-year window, everything is available online for free. That's part of the values of the Historical Society, is that we are stewards of history, not owners of history. And so we want to make all of this information available for people. So you'll find on our website, all of the back editions of Chebacco, and all of the articles are available for download as PDFs for free. But if you're not a member of the Society and you want to receive this edition of Chebacco, you can go to our website and be able to get a membership there. And then you'll have a chance to receive Chebacco when it comes in May.
Great. So can you tell us a little bit about what the theme is? Like we see it right here, imagining what if. What does that mean for this year's Chebacco?
So when the staff were brainstorming about what we wanted to do for 2022, we were playing with the notions of alternative history. This was really as the pandemic was just getting started, and so many people were looking back at the past of what had happened in the 1918 flu pandemic and how that compared to things taking place around us today. And there was a lot of speculation that you heard about, what if this had happened, or what if people had done that? We also know that sort of alternative history fiction is really popular. There's TV shows or books that are written about, what if Hitler had won the war, or what if the South had seceded and we'd never had a civil war? All sorts of what ifs that we're play with the idea of, one decision can really alter and change the course of history. And so we thought, well, how does that reflect on the environment of Mount Desert Island today? What kinds of historic decisions were made or not made that we see affecting the environment and the culture or the development of the island today? And so that's really what we started to play with. And the original title was Possibilities of the Past, which just seemed kind of cumbersome and not necessarily easy to understand. And then I realized that I think what we're really doing is just imagining what if. We're playing a game of what if something was different? What would happen?
So after I, of course, started playing with this theme in my own head, some of the what ifs I thought of with my connection to Beatrix Farrand through some of the work I've done with her on the island. I thought about her horticulture center that could have been in downtown Bar Harbor. And it is really wonderful to think about how downtown Bar Harbor could have been a botanical garden that educated, lovers of plants and horticulture around the world, and how much that would have served our community. And so it is really interesting and inspiring, but it can also kind of cause concern sometimes, which we're going to talk about a little bit more later. Another what if that I considered was what if the train still went to the top of Cadillac Mountain, because I have heard about that and I just think it's so, and there's a lot of urban legends and folklore around it, and it's really an interesting thing. And so I like to consider, like, what would have happened if, or how would it be different if we had the train still going up to the top of Cadillac Mountain. I'm going to share an image right now that'll show that. There it is. So this is,
I don't think it's big enough to take people up to the top of Cadillac
now,
anymore.
I mean, as it's looking here, we don't necessarily think it would possibly solve the traffic congestion problem on the top of Cadillac Mountain now, but it is interesting to think about what if there was some kind of public transport option and what that might look like for the top of Cadillac Mountain, which continuously has congestion problems. So can you tell us about some of the articles that are in the new Chebacco and how they're exploring this concept of what if?
Yeah, well, talking about the transportation issue specifically, we have an article that explores what if the electric trolley that had been proposed for the island had actually been built. So there were a number of proposals about the electric trolley sort of floating around, but then George Dorr ended up actually pursuing it and forming a company to see if they could plan. There's, if you have a chance to see the articles, or I know you're interviewing the author, Sean Cox, in one of the future Chebacco chats, he has a map, sort of outlining and detailing where the proposed trolley was coming off of, come from the mainland onto the island and down into Bar Harbor. And so one of the photographs that's so fascinating is this one right here that came out of this research, which is a photoshopped from 1909, sort of glued together image of what it would look like maybe in downtown Bar Harbor if there were electric trolleys in town. So in this image on the left-hand side, that is Bar Harbor on the corner of the town green. And then on the right, where the trolleys are, is a photoshopped image from some other town. That's not Bar Harbor. Those are not Bar Harbor businesses. And you can actually even see in the picture the piece of the electric trolley that would connect to the lines up above, that sort of armature, is just up into kind of nothing. There's no electric network above it that would be required to make those trolleys run, which is one of the clues that this is a photoshopped image, as well as that really blurry line that extends down the middle of it. And so what if this trolley had been built? What would the streets of Bar Harbor be like if we had electric trolleys running through them? How would the formation of the park have been a little bit different, especially coming as you approach Bar Harbor, where and through Kibo, there was lines that were being proposed to extend down through the Kibo golf course area and the private property in there. And so we explore a little bit about why this didn't end up happening, why it ultimately failed for Bar Harbor.
Well, I'm really looking forward to reading that one. That sounds amazing. Okay, are there any other examples of articles that point to potential transportation nightmares? And I'm thinking specifically of Betsy Hewitt's Tea House article. Could you tell us a little bit more about that one?
Yeah, so this article was so much fun to be involved with, and Betsy's a great author and a really amazing historian, as they all are. And she had found that if the plans had gone through, Rockefeller had actually planned for 3 carriage gatehouses. We have 2 now, the Brown Mountain Gatehouse and the one at Jordan Pond, but there was a 3rd planned. And it would have been right at the bottom of McFarland Hill, where the road or the parking area is now for the Eagle Lake carriage trail system. And so you can see here a little snippet Betsy drew on a map where the tea house would have been situated. And so you can see from the left-hand side of the screen, the approach down McFarland Hill, and then where it flattens out, right where the 2 parking areas are on either side of the road, this gigantic horse stable and tea house would have been located here. And actually the plans for this tea house had been so far kind of in the, assuming that it was going to be successful and assuming that it was going to work, that the Rockefellers moved the road. So you'll have a chance in the article to see some of the designs where they have the blueprints indicating where the road was at the time that the tea house was planned. And then they moved the road to where the current position is to make room for that facility between the lake and the road. So the road was actually moved, and some beautiful design sketches were made. That's actually the cover of Chebacco, is the drawing from the architect of what the side of the tea house profile would have looked like were it in that site. Yeah, there's so one section of that massive facility. And so now every time I go down McFarland Hill or I pass that area, and we all know how congested that is in the summer, I imagine what an incredible challenge it would have been for the park and for the town of Bar Harbor and all of us to have this huge tea house there. And this it would have been beautiful, but also a real challenge to our infrastructure if it was actually built.
Yes, I can only imagine. And since I read this article myself, I've pictured it many times, and I have a feeling we won't be the only ones that will be doing that in the future. So there's this really, really great quote from your introduction to Chebacco this year, and I'll quote it now. It says, "Understanding, appreciating, and critiquing the world around us now requires knowledge about the decisions that were made in the past and under what conditions." So could you give us some examples of Chebacco articles that consider issues that are present and active within our communities now?
Yeah, I mean, a really big one is related to this aquaculture and salmon pen, that's the farm that's being proposed. And so Natalie there, oh, sorry, I did them out of order. Natalie Springle, who works for Sea Grant and is also on our board, wrote a great article about the history of net salmon and pens in the Frenchman Bay area in the past. And so as we look at the proposals that are being made today and evaluated today by American Aqua Farms, it's really helpful and important to have some sort of sense of what's been done in the past in the Bay. There have been salmon farms in the past. A lot of them have failed for various reasons. And so Natalie goes through and sort of documents what the strengths and weaknesses are for this environment to farm salmon, what the ventures have been in the past and why they've fallen through, so that as we consider the proposals being made for the Bay now, we have some context for what's already happened in the past. I feel like every decision that we make, if we can understand the scope of history involved in the decisions that were made to bring us up to this point, we can make better and more informed decisions moving forward. So if we have a really good understanding of the challenges that other salmon farms have faced in our environment and the consequences of having those types of businesses here, we have more information to weigh and to make decisions about these kinds of proposals moving forward. And then you flashed a picture of one of the other things, which is very, I think in my mind, one of the most pressing things is that as we look to the past to understand what's happening around us today, we can have a better understanding of the obligation that we have to the future. So every decision that we make now has impact in the future. And so I sort of see history as a conversation with the future. And so as we look to decisions in the past and what they mean for our lives today, we really need that information to be able to make sound decisions for what's happening in the future. And so we have things that we're deciding now that are either going to make good decisions or bad decisions, or good outcomes or bad outcomes, and probably a mix of all of those things for future generations. And so I think a really healthy and robust discussion about what we're willing to lose and what we're willing to fight to keep is healthy in any community and is necessary. And so we have these incredible new pieces of art that Jennifer Steenboer has created that reflect change in our environment now. And I hope are going to prompt people to question, what if we don't respond to this ultimate challenge of climate change that's ahead of us? We're already seeing drastic changes in our communities and in the island environments. And Jennifer really went out and thought and researched very thoroughly kind of what some of those changes are and what's going to happen in the future if we don't address them. And so for me, this photo essay and the work that she did prompts a lot of what ifs in my own mind. You know, what if the Gulf continues to warm at this rate? What if we're not able to make really strong climate decisions in our own communities? What kind of impacts are those going to have for species moving in, beloved species that we might lose, and the nature, the environment of the island, where the preservation that we value here, especially with Acadia National Park, is only so much under our control. There's a lot of factors that are far beyond our control in these situations. And so having the discussion about what if we can't make these changes to preserve the resources that we love, you know, what's going to happen and what can we do about it? And I think Jen's essay really inspires us to think about that.
So I think it's safe to say that we're both really proud of this Chebacco, and we're both really looking forward to it coming out and sharing it with our members. And we're also really excited about Chebacco chats this season. So I'm going to share now our season 3. This is the first half, which we'll do through March and April, and then we're going to pick back up in the winter months. But we have our season premiere today, and then we're re-airing an episode next week by Liam Reardon on Maine's long journey to statehood. The reason we selected this one to re-air is because Liam started out with the question of what if Washington County and Hancock County had not voted to separate from Massachusetts during the long journey to statehood, and it was a matter of debate. So that's a really interesting talk, one of our earliest Chebacco chats. So we're going to be re-airing that next week. And then you can see here, we have all the way episodes through till April 21st. And you can visit www.mdihistory.org to see the full schedule and to get the Zoom link again if you need that. So I'm going to stop sharing now. Thank you so much, Raney, for that really interesting sneak peek into our new Chebacco. And we had one comment from a viewer, which was Bruce Jacobson, our good friend, Bruce, who said that the causeway onto the island was built for the trolley. If no trolley proposal, no road to the mainland. That's really interesting. And I'm curious to see more about this topic in Sean Cox's article. As I said, it'll be available in May. So,
well, and that just sparks a whole bunch of what ifs, like, you know, what if we didn't have connection to the mainland, and what if we lose it because of sea level rise? And so, yeah, I just feel like the sort of game of what if is endless and always entertaining.
Oh, I almost included, what if you could just drive across the Sound from Northeast Harbor to Southwest Harbor? Like, how much time would you save in a year if you didn't go around the Sound? But what would that do to the Sound? And, you know, the same thing happened to me. So it is a really fun game. And we hope that our members and the readers of Chebacco are going to be inspired to do the same kind of thinking we've been doing over here. So we're up at 5 and we don't have any questions from our viewers. So I just want to thank you, Raney, for joining us today. And we will be back again next week, as I said, 4:30 on Thursdays. If you have any questions about Chebacco, oh, I see from Jennifer Boer that there was also a causeway planned to Bar Harbor. And she added a Flickr album that includes some photographs. So we will include that in our resources when we upload this episode and the information about this episode. So you can view information about Chebacco chats on our website. If you have questions for Chebacco, about Chebacco for Raney, please email her at raney@mdihistory.org. And questions about Chebacco chats can come to me, and that's Jenna.Jandreau, Jandreau @mdihistory.org. So thank you all very much for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, Raney.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.